On Friday, December 29, 2006, inside a small concrete cell in Baghdad, a man was being held whose exact location was unknown to the outside world. Saddam Hussein woke up from sleep, unaware that the final chapter of his life was already being quietly prepared. While he remained in the dark, the elite guards responsible for his security already knew what was coming. Within the tightly controlled Super 12 unit, whispers had been circulating for days. Their officers had just informed them that Saddam would soon be moved from Building 114, a top-secret, maximum security detention facility, located on an isolated section of Baghdad. This was the place where he had spent the last phase of his life. But the guards sensed that the countdown was nearing its end. Not long after, plans were set in motion to hand him over to Iraqi authorities. His lawyers had visited him days earlier. Members of his family had also been allowed to see him. To the guards, these visits felt like silent signals and spoken confirmation that the end was approaching. Even though no one officially said it out loud, for nearly 3 years US forces had monitored him closely. They guarded him, spoke with him, and at times even shared casual conversations. Yet within just a few hours, he would be gone from this world forever. After the death sentence was announced on December 5, 2006, Saddam Hussein made a request. He asked to be executed by firing squad, like a soldier. To him, it seemed like a more honorable way to die. That request, however, was firmly rejected. Then came the early morning of December 30, 2006. Just hours before sunrise on Eid al-Adha, Saddam woke up as he did every day before dawn. Sitting on the floor, he performed ablution and began reciting verses from the Quran in silence. At around 3 in the morning, the commanders of the execution team entered the room and asked the guards to leave. They informed Saddam that the sentence would be carried out within hours. Among them was First Lieutenant Andrew Jackson. According to his report, upon hearing the news, Saddam remained calm. He looked at them steadily. There was no visible fear on his face, no emotional breakdown. He simply said, in a measured voice, that he had already faced death before. Before the official announcement of Saddam Hussein's death sentence, Sergeant Bagley quietly destroyed his radio so Saddam would not hear the news prematurely and break down emotionally. At around 3:24 a.m., Saddam requested permission to take a bath, and the guards allowed it. Shortly afterward, he was offered his final meal: grilled chicken, a small portion of rice, a piece of flatbread, some fruit, and a glass of water. Saddam chose only the water, refusing to touch any of the food. An American doctor then offered him a sleeping medication to ensure he would not feel discomfort. Saddam calmly declined, saying he wanted to face the end with a clear mind. After drinking water, he picked up a small piece of bread and gently tossed it out the window toward the birds, a habit he practiced daily. Because of this routine, birds often gathered near his cell. He then performed the Fajr prayer and returned to his metal chair, once again reciting from the Quran. The copy of the Quran he held had been gifted to him by his wife, Sajida. After finishing his recitation, he closed the book, pressed it to his chest, and quietly said, "This is my final companion." At around 4 o'clock, an American officer in charge entered the room and said, "Mr. President, it is time to go." Saddam looked at him calmly and replied that he wished to wear his old coat and say a final goodbye to his brothers, Barzan Ibrahim and Sabawi Ibrahim. One of the guards, surprised, said the room was warm and that a coat was unnecessary. Saddam responded with a faint smile, explaining that the air in Baghdad before dawn can be cold, and that he did not want his people to think their former leader was trembling in fear. After putting on the coat, he shook hands with the American guards, one by one. Over time, their long and close proximity had created a quiet bond, almost like an unspoken friendship. Whenever Saddam addressed a guard, he did so politely, often calling them "my friend." He then removed his Rolex watch and placed it into a guard's hand, offering it as a gift. By then, all members of the Super 12 guard unit had gathered outside his cell to escort him. Looking at them, Saddam remarked that they had become more like family to him than anyone else, and he thanked them for their kindness. Moments later, Saddam Hussein was escorted toward an armored vehicle. After that, Saddam Hussein was transported by Black Hawk helicopter to Camp Justice. Camp Justice was located in Baghdad's Qadamiyya area and had once served as the headquarters of Iraq's military intelligence. In the past, Saddam's political opponents were held captive there. Now, history had turned in on itself. This was the same place where Saddam Hussein's sentence would be carried out. As the helicopter lifted into the air, Saddam made a quiet request. He asked to see his city, Baghdad, one last time. With the guard's permission, he gazed down at the city he had ruled for more than 2 decades, silently taking it in for the final time. After a brief flight, he was transferred once again into an armored vehicle and taken toward the final location. Camp Justice was heavily secured. US soldiers surrounded the area from the outside, while Iraqi forces controlled the interior, including the execution chamber. At this point, American personnel formally handed Saddam Hussein over to Iraqi authorities so that the process would appear entirely Iraqi. He was placed under the custody of Moaffaq al-Ruba'i, Iraq's national security advisor at the time, and a former member of the Shiite Dawa party, someone who had once suffered severe treatment during Saddam's rule. Now, fate had positioned him to escort his former enemy toward the end. Saddam was led into the old military intelligence building, which had been converted into a temporary holding facility. Inside, the execution chamber had already been prepared. The room was dimly lit. At the center stood a wooden platform with a concealed trapdoor, and above it hung a thick rope tied with multiple knots. According to accounts later shared by Saddam's lawyer, Khalil al-Dalami, eyewitnesses reported that Saddam was restrained, yet showed no visible signs of fear. He had not taken any sedatives and remained fully conscious. A judge entered and began reading the charges aloud. During this moment, Saddam raised his voice, shouting political slogans, while some individuals present responded with chants of their own. Tensions rose sharply inside the chamber, turning the atmosphere hostile rather than procedural. According to al-Dalami's account, the situation quickly became chaotic. With emotions overtaking order, Saddam began reciting the Shahada, the Islamic declaration of faith. Moments later, the mechanism beneath him was activated, and he disappeared from view. What happened immediately afterward has remained a subject of controversy and conflicting reports. Different accounts describe the moments that followed in very different ways, and no single version has ever been universally accepted. At around 6 in the morning, gunfire was heard outside, but it was not an attack. It was celebratory fire from Saddam's opponents, who had waited years for this moment. Following the execution, a new challenge emerged: where and how Saddam Hussein's body would be buried. US forces removed his remains from Camp Justice, and within 24 hours, his body was transferred to his birthplace near Tikrit. He was buried under the cover of night. The funeral was not a public event. Only close family members, a few religious figures, and local tribal representatives were present. According to Khalil al-Dalami, an unusual incident occurred shortly after the burial. A main water pipe near the grave suddenly burst, flooding the area. He believed this was done intentionally, possibly to prevent the body from being exhumed for public display. Fearing further disturbance, Saddam's family later moved his remains to another undisclosed location, where he was buried again in secrecy.